Hello, I'm Kamal Santamaria. This is Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera, your weekly look at the world of business and economics. This week, Kenya. Could the East African nation become a new factory of the world? It'll need a lot of work, but Kenya has ambitious plans to industrialize the country by the year 2030. Also this week, Lebanon, an economy buffeted by conflict and now housing millions of Syrian refugees. How is one small country managing under such pressure? And millions of people go without food in Mexico, and yet the nation dumps tons of the stuff every year. But there are those trying to change the system. Africa has many strong economies, places which have grown over the years into significant global players. We're zeroing in on one of those this week, Kenya, which has seen average growth of 5% for the past decade, which isn't bad at all. But Kenya has bigger goals. It wants 10% growth by 2017, which means our population 75% dependent on farming needs to expand, diversify and industrialize. Let's run through some numbers first off to explain where Kenya is right now. The economy is expected to expand by 6.5% in the next 3 years on average. That's good. It makes Kenya one of the fastest growing economies in sub-Saharan Africa, according to the World Bank. But the poverty index is high, and Kenya still has the highest number of slums in Africa. 42% of the population, or almost 20 million people, are living on less than $1 a day. And malnutrition is estimated to cost Kenya $35 billion between 2010 and 2030, with the loss of 527,000 lives as a result. So you see that beyond the great economic numbers that would be the envy of many developed nations, there's a real need for Kenya's government to take the lead. And it is. It wants to expand and industrialise by 2030. And we're going to look more at that vision later with our guest. First, though, Catherine Soy looks at how expansion and change will impact the country's growing informal economy.
This is not a job for everyone. You can't help but feel clouded by the clanging of hammers on metal here. Roughly 5,000 men and women spend their days toiling in this blacksmith market in a Nairobi suburb. They're the face of Kenya's informal economy, and they've created a one-stop shop for affordable household and commercial appliances. Joseph Olonyaoro sells these metal luggage boxes and wheelbarrows. It takes about 5 hours to make each, and they sell at an average of $20 and $50.
The government is helping us to get loans, to acquire new machinery so that we make better products for the market.
Kenya's informal sector employs roughly 11.8 million people and contributes over 20% to the economy.
Some of the blacksmiths here have been doing this for decades, and now the government wants to make them part of its plan to transform Kenya to an industrialized country by 2030. But these men who work under strenuous conditions say that they are now facing competition from cheap imports from countries like China.
Some economists say it will be hard to grow small businesses if they continue facing unfair competition.
There's a possibility that the countries that then export those goods that end up on our retail shelves might dangle a little bit of their billions to African governments to look the other way and go back to the same challenge of ignoring their own citizens in terms of how to grow their capabilities.
On a large scale, there are plans to create industrial parks along this railway line that is meant to connect Kenya to other East African countries. The government is promising incentives for investors and industrialists who set up shops in the hubs.
The cultural setup of the country is not supporting capability to industrialize because we are looking at a cultural setup where the kind of education system we inherited was such that we were supposed to produce employees.
Back at the market, the blacksmiths keep doing what they've done for years. They're a big part of the 2030 plan, but they want the government to help them upgrade their operations to make it easier and faster for them to do their job.
Right, so on that note, let's talk to the man in charge of Kenya's 2030 vision. Joining us from Nairobi, Adan Mohamed. He is the Kenyan Cabinet Secretary for Industrialisation and Enterprise. Thank you so much for your time, sir. Kenya's vision for 2030. Tell us, in the broadest possible terms, what that means. Where do you want Kenya to be in 2030?
Well, Kenya Vision 2030 is a development blueprint that was established by the country over 10 years ago, really to help us project our future as a country on many fronts. And it's got basically 3 pillars that are critical to achieving the goal of Vision 2030. The goal actually is to be a middle-income country by 2030, to be industrialized, and to be able to actually improve the health and welfare of our people. And the 3 pillars as follows. The first one is the political pillar. And when we set up this vision, a while ago, we had a different constitution. Our governance structures were all different from what we have now. And a key part of deliverable of a political pillar was to have a new constitution that separates different arms of government, the judiciary, legislature, and the executive, and have many other components, a key one of which was to actually have a devolved form of government to actually bring resources and decision-making much more closer to the people. That pillar has been delivered and delivered successfully as part of that Vision 2030 program. The second one is the social pillar, which is to make sure that we have free healthcare, free education for people up to secondary education. And that is also a program that is well advanced and underway to achievement. And so we have fantastic track record in some of those areas. So today as we speak, we have free primary education, free secondary education, and even the university education is getting a lot of support from government through subsidized loan programs. Healthcare, significant improvement and investment by government. We have a free medical system, and that needs to progress. I think the third and equally important one is what we call the economic pillar, which aims, amongst many other things, to see how we can grow our economy by 10% until 2030. And that is going to really help us grow our economy, and that is one that, understandably, because of interdependencies of what we do with the rest of the world, has taken us a bit longer than we would have liked to. So those are the 3 broad pillars of the vision that is geared to making Kenya a middle-income country, a significant amount of contribution from manufacturing and service sector, and have a healthy, well-educated population by the year 2030. So good progress, a very consistently endorsed vision by successive governments, and we're very pleased on the progress we are making.
Okay, so let's start getting into how you actually get there, because right now, manufacturing would be the largest earner for Kenya after agriculture. And that's not necessarily been going as well as you might have wanted. You know, Kenya's been losing a bit of competitive edge and jobs are being lost as well. How are you turning all that around right now?
Well, so basically now, diving deeply into the economic pillar, manufacturing is one of the major components of that program, and manufacturing as a sector has contributed between 10 to 12% for a considerable amount of time, and has stagnated at that level, not because we are not doing much in that area, but because other sectors have been growing much faster than that. But our intention is to grow manufacturing to be something between 15 to 20% of GDP. And if you look back and appreciate why that has been a challenge, it relates to really most of the issues that underpin manufacturing sectors across the board. Issues around high cost of electricity, inefficiencies and underinvestments in infrastructure, high cost of logistics, whether they are at the port, roads, rail, air traffic, energy and energy supply. So We've had, for example, in the last 50 years as a country, had about just under 2,000 megawatts of power. The plan now is to put an additional 5,000 megawatts of power in the next 5 years. This is really all geared towards making sure that in order to attract industries, you must have adequate and competitive power. And these are all things that are underway, are work in progress, and we feel confident, given the pipeline of some of the initiatives that we're seeing, that should be able to drive some of our economic programs forward.
And I would also suggest, right now at least, that one of the issues you need to improve is your trade balance, because, I mean, you'll know this, you can't go on importing more than you are exporting and selling. Otherwise, you will have, like so many other countries have, a currency crisis of sorts.
Indeed, indeed. And actually, we recognize and appreciate that, you know, over 3/4 of global trade in manufactured goods. And if you are not manufacturing anything, you end up just becoming an importer, to your point. And so we have taken cognizance of that. And whilst we appreciate that we cannot be competitive in all industries, we've got to pick sectors where we feel that as Kenya, as East Africa, or as the continent of Africa, we have comparative advantages in actually competing for those industries. Industries are no more only focusing on low-cost locations as a way of, you know, placing their destinations for production. They are also now wanting to be much more closer to the markets that are going to, you know, be the ones where they will sell their products to. And the continent of Africa is now becoming one of the biggest, you know, future markets with a big growing middle class. And so these are all opportunities that we are very aware of, but we've got to be prepared. We've got to make sure that we have adequate energy supply. We've got sufficient infrastructure. We've got sufficient amount of talented and skilled people who actually would play a key part in providing support to these, you know, incoming industries. So I think the excitement is there. The clarity of what we want to achieve is there. In some cases, we may not be able to do it as quickly as we would have liked to, naturally because of some of the interdependencies that we have with the rest of the world, and occasional shocks, you know, pull us back. But directionally, we feel confident and comfortable, given the level of interest that we are seeing, that we should be able to make progress in the right direction.
Adan Mohammed, Kenya's Cabinet Secretary for Industrialisation and Enterprise, we thank you for your time. And still ahead on Counting the Cost, Food for All, the movement in Mexico that's attempting to salvage dumped food to feed the poorest. Right now, though, we turn to Lebanon, which since 1975 has lurched from one crisis to another. There's been civil war, Syrian occupation, Hezbollah's clashes with Israel, and now the influx of more than 1 million Syrian refugees. And all these things have brought with them an economic pinch. More recently, though, it was an event of Lebanon's own doing which caused problems. With the closure of the country's main landfill in July, the treatment, disposal and storage of rubbish was disrupted, leading to that massive pile-up in the streets. The result was a protest movement called You Stink, demanding a solution first to the waste crisis and then developing into political demands. The rubbish in the street also threatened tourism, which is a key economic driver. 3 Gulf countries issued travel warnings to Lebanon, leading to around 20% of hotel bookings to be cancelled. And there's, of course, the refugee crisis, with more than 1.6 million of them living in Lebanon. The World Bank estimates it's costing the country $5 billion a year. At the same time, don't forget there's a political vacuum. The Lebanese parliament has failed to elect a new president since May of 2014. Joining us from Beirut to explain it all is Nassib Ghobril, who's the chief economist at Byblos Bank Group. Nassib, before we get into all the challenges that Lebanon faces, tell us more about its past successes, because I'm seeing here that, you know, go back to 2007, growth was about 8%. That was fantastic growth for that time.
Yes, good morning, and that's a very good question. Between 2007 and 2010, actually, annual average growth rate was 9.2% in Lebanon. In 2009, real GDP growth reached 10.1%. These exceptional growth rates took place during a period of global recession, with the global financial crisis hitting economies in the West, as well as in emerging and developing countries, as well as some Arab economies. The reason why Lebanon posted these growth rates are because of the restoration of political stability and proper security conditions after the Doha Accord in May 2008. The Lebanese economy depends primarily on consumer confidence and investor sentiment. Unfortunately, during that period where Lebanon was growing at an average of 9.2% annually, that was a window of opportunities for Lebanese authorities to implement the structural reforms that would have helped reduce the weaknesses of the Lebanese economies and therefore help the economy absorb better those political and military shocks domestically and regionally, and therefore would have been able to post a higher growth rates than the 1.4% we have seen between 2011 and 2014. And this year, things do not look very promising, as the Central Bank of Lebanon projected growth to be near 0%.
Okay, so let's start looking at some of these specific issues. Refugees is obviously one, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But first I want to talk about infrastructure, because, you know, Lebanon has had all these conflicts over the years, war, destruction, things which have obviously affected communications and roads and other infrastructure. Is it a priority for the Lebanese to fix all of that, to grow the country off the back of all that construction?
Oh, absolutely. Infrastructure is a major obstacle to growth, to the competitiveness of the Lebanese economy. If you look at the rankings of Lebanon on the Global Competitive Index, it's ranked 101st out of 140 countries. And one of the major reasons Lebanon is not ranked higher is the ranking of its infrastructure, which is about 137 out of 140 countries. We definitely need an upgrade in the infrastructure, in the road infrastructure. Electricity is a major burden on the private sector, as well as on public finances. Telecommunications are expensive and are poor in terms of quality. Water supply needs improvement, you name it. And therefore, the only way to upgrade the infrastructure is for the Lebanese parliament to ratify the public-private partnership draft law that exists, and eventually, when the proper conditions allow it, to start gradually privatizing state-owned enterprises through listing some of their shares on the Beirut Stock Exchange. So definitely infrastructure is a major obstacle to growth, and the reason growth has declined significantly from 9.2% annually between 2007 and 2010 and to 1.4% between 2011 and 2014, or one of the major reasons is the poor infrastructure in the country that reduced the ability of the economy to absorb shocks.
Okay, we should talk about the refugees then who are coming from Syria. I'm conscious about referring to them as a quote-unquote burden because, of course, they are fleeing a terrible situation in Syria, but the strain that must put on the Lebanese economy, can you put a number on it, how much it's costing Lebanon?
Yes, first of all, I don't like to separate the impact of the Syrian refugees on the Lebanese economy from the impact of the Syrian conflict overall. They are part of the spillover from the Syrian conflict on consumer sentiment, on investor confidence, on tourist arrivals, on exports, on the overall functioning of the economy. But if you look at the impact of Syrian refugees on the economy, it's not black or white. It's not negative or positive. There are some who say, no, it's positive. There is 1.2 million registered refugees, therefore they are consuming, therefore it's helping sustain economic activity. Or no, they constitute a burden on the Lebanese economy because of their sheer numbers and the impact on infrastructure and services, who are already weak, as we just discussed. Actually, it's both. But overall, definitely the economy is feeling the impact of these refugees. Another point I would like to make also is the decline in the labor costs of Lebanon, especially low-skilled labor costs, because of the presence of the large number of Syrians who are desperate to seek work to support their families. We cannot escape this. There is a decline in the labor cost of low-skilled workers in Lebanon because of that. But most of this work is taking place in the informal economy, not in the formal economy. Right. And the informal economy is equivalent to 30% of the Lebanese economy. It is large because of the high operating costs in the private sector. That's why there are many enterprises who are operating outside the formal economy. And that's where usually the Syrians work. Traditionally, the Syrian workers in Lebanon have worked in low-skilled jobs such as agriculture on a seasonal basis, or construction, or other menial jobs. And when the Syrian refugees arrived in Lebanon, the first segment they have competed with is their fellow Syrians who already were working in Lebanon. And then they started competing with the low-skilled foreign labor that existed in Lebanon. And then they started to compete with Lebanese in terms of those who have opened small restaurants or carpenter stores or tailors shops at this level. This notion that the Syrian labor is threatening the Lebanese workforce, I think, is exaggerated on the one hand. But on the other hand, no one can deny that there is an increasing burden on public service deliveries from the presence of 1.4 million Syrians in just a few years on Lebanese territory.
Nasib Ghubril with a great overview there of Lebanon's economy. Nasib, we thank you. Finally this week, food security. Around 800 tons of food is wasted on a daily basis in Mexico, a country where 27 million people suffer from hunger and malnutrition. Now, anyone can see that doesn't add up. John Holman takes up the story from Mexico City.
The Mexico City wholesale food market is the biggest in the world, according to the government who run it. It's a hive of activity. 30,000 metric tons of meat, fruit and veg move through here every year, which inevitably means a huge amount of wasted food, an estimated almost 800 tons daily. The government and civil organisations agree that's a problem, which is why NGO Food for Everyone is trying to make sure that excess gets to those who need it most. They've set up food banks just outside the market.
Every morning we go to the Mexico City wholesale market to get food, to get vegetables and fruit, because there's a lot of poverty in Mexico and there are a lot of people that need it from schools, communities.
It's not just the mega market with a waste problem. A country where 27 million people suffer from hunger and bad diet throws a staggering amount of produce in the bin.
More than a third of the food that Mexico produces currently goes to waste, and that's about 30 million kilos. But if just part of that food could get to those in need, then no one in Mexico will go hungry.
Right now, Mexico rescues only 2% of wasted food. NGOs say it could do much more, especially if the huge farms which supply US and Mexican supermarkets donated, instead of dumping, the produce their clients reject.
In Mexico, the countryside is very productive, so we have like this huge opportunity to really go to this countryside, bring this excellent food to the food banks, and from there deliver it to the people which is in need.
Better roads and more specialised transport are needed to do that, as well as tax breaks to encourage firms to donate. The government hasn't got there yet, but is slowly coming round to food rescue, ploughing money in nationwide and opening a food bank of their own in the wholesale market.
Yes, definitely the country is changing. We're seeing that vulnerable groups need support, and there is solidarity, headed up by the government and civil society.
In practical terms, that means 3 square meals a day for these children in one of the schools benefiting from the Food for Everyone food banks. For a nation which has long struggled to feed itself, it seems a way forward.
And that's our show for this week. There's more for you online though at aljazeera.com/CTC. It takes you straight to our page, which has individual reports, links and entire episodes for you to catch up on. You can also get in touch with us by tweeting me at KamalAJE. Our business editor is at Abid Oliver Ali, and you can use the hashtag AJCTC or just drop us an email. Counting the Cost at aljazeera.net is the address. But that is it for this edition of Counting the Cost. I'm Kamal Santamaria from the whole team. Thanks for joining us. The news on Al Jazeera is next.